Mattis, U.S. national security focus no longer terrorism. U.S. Defence Secretary James Mattis has said competition between great powers, not terrorism, is now the main focus of America's national security. The U.S. faced growing threats from revisionist powers as different as China and Russia, he said, unveiling the national defense strategy. In an apparent reference to Russia, he warned against threatening America's experiment in democracy. "If you challenge us, it will be your longest and worst day," he warned. America has been gripped by ongoing investigations into alleged collusion between the Trump 2016 election campaign and Russia. Speaking in Washington, Mr. Mattis also appealed to Congress to fund the military adequately and refrain from indiscriminate and automatic cuts to the U.S. federal budget. President Donald Trump is seeking to boost defense spending by 10%, or $54 billion (£43 billion) in his proposed budget plan for this year, and hopes to recoup that sum through deep cuts elsewhere, including to foreign aid.
Engaged in today, but great power competition, not terrorism, is now the primary focus of U.S. national security. This strategy is fit for our time, providing the American people the military required to protect our way of life, stand with our allies, and live up to our responsibility to pass intact to the next generation those freedoms that all of us enjoy here today. We face growing threats from revisionist powers as different as China and Russia are from each other, nations that do seek to create a world consistent with their authoritarian models, pursuing veto authority over other nations' economic, diplomatic, and security decisions.
America's competitive edge fast eroding. By Jonathan Marcus, BBC Defense and diplomatic correspondent. The publication of the Trump administration's new national defense strategy signals an important shift in Washington's priorities. For almost 2 decades, ever since the attacks of 9/11, America's military focus has been on fighting terrorism, with counterinsurgency campaigns in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria. But now there is to be a renewed emphasis on interstate strategic competition, matching so-called peer competitors like Russia and China. U.S. Defense Secretary James Mattis is right when he says that Washington's competitive military edge is fast eroding. There needs to be investment in a range of new technologies that might provide the edge on a future battlefield. But it is not simply a matter of spending more money. He pointed to the difficulty of passing budgets on Capitol Hill over successive years, which, he said, had done more damage to U.S. military readiness than any enemy in the field.
I know what you're saying. I mean, after all, look at all the territory they've lost. In 2014, the group controlled 10 million people in large parts of Iraq and Syria. Then, the world took notice and took action. So yes, the dream of a caliphate, an Islamic state, that's over. But IS can still do damage. Their leader is still out there, despite numerous reports of his death.
They may have killed the ISIS leader.
Reports that Baghdadi was among those killed.
Could be a big victory in the war on terror.
He's still releasing messages, calling on his followers to continue your jihad and your blessed operations. Those followers, they're still listening, and there are probably thousands of them. So expect to see more of this in the region, bomb attacks, killing and maiming large numbers of civilians. And not just in Iraq and Syria. IS has active franchises in Afghanistan, in Yemen, in Libya. And yes, there will continue to be attacks in the West too. London, Barcelona, Paris, We can't always say that these attacks were actually planned or commissioned by the group. That's not the point. The point is that the ideology alone is often enough to inspire those attacks. And the ideology is very much alive. To understand why, just look at the places where it started. Syria's civil war shows no sign of ending. Iraq is still divided too. You have the Kurds in the north who voted overwhelmingly for independence. And then there's everyone else with an interest in the area. Russia, America, Iran, Turkey, all with their own different agendas. You have splits along sectarian lines, along ethnic lines, and along regional lines. And as long as those rivalries exist, the Middle East is going to remain a deeply unstable place, fertile ground for those who don't mind mixing extreme violence with a narrow medieval version of Islam. And remember, groups like IS, like its predecessors, were able to cause mayhem without actually occupying any territory. There's no reason to suppose that won't happen again. As one Iraqi officer said to me, this is never going to end.
How much have U.S. defense priorities changed? This is the first time the defense policies of the Trump administration have been spelled out in one place. The threats listed are the same as under the Obama administration, but the order of priority is different. Formerly, jihadist militant groups like Islamic State or al-Qaeda were the focus, but latterly America's former Cold War opponents, Russia and China, have reasserted themselves strategically. We face growing threats from revisionist powers as different as China and Russia, nations that seek to create a world consistent with their authoritarian models, Mr. Mattis said.
Well, we've taken off from the airbase on a Russian military plane and we're heading somewhere. I don't know where, because when you're on a guided tour around Syria with the Russian army, they never tell you where they're taking you. So we've been brought to a school in the city of Aleppo to show that life is returning to normal here.
We think Russia and the President of Russia, President Putin, need peace, love peace, working for peace in all the world. And we are really, really thankful for Russia and for President of Russia.
It's quite clear that a large part of Aleppo still lies in ruins. But what the Russian army is trying to demonstrate by bringing us here, even if it does feel a little stage managed, is that gradually life is returning to this city and that Russia is playing a part in that. Steve Rosenberg, BBC News, Aleppo.
How big a threat to America are Russia and China? The three great nuclear powers have posed a permanent and existential threat to each other since Cold War days. In recent years, however, fears have risen of the once unthinkable, a direct conventional clash, particularly between Russia and the US in Syria or Ukraine. The new strategy recognizes that China and Russia in particular have been assiduously working over a number of years to develop their military capabilities to challenge our military advantages, said Elbridge Colby, U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Strategy and Force Development. This strategy really represents a fundamental shift to say, look, we have to get back, in a sense, to the basics of the potential for war, and this strategy says the focus will be on prioritizing preparedness for war, in particular major power war, he added.
military. Just listen to the music they're using.
这个船大那么大. That means this ship is big. It's very big. I'm Celia Hatton, the BBC's Chinese expert. This ship is a real source of Chinese pride because it's the first time China's tried to build its own aircraft carrier. The only other aircraft carrier it has, the Liaoning, is 25 years old, and so it really needs a new ship.
So what will the ship actually do?
The ship is being built really to patrol the South China Sea. That's the key point of regional tension in the Asia-Pacific, and it's going to carry a lot of China's fighter jets.
So does this mean China can compete with the US military?
Not quite yet. China spends about $148 billion a year on its military. That's the world's second largest amount. It also has the world's largest standing army. But the US spends far more than that, and it has 10 aircraft.
What pitch for funding did Mr. Mattis make? The National Defense Strategy provides guidance for the 2019 defense budget. While the U.S. was still strong, the Defense Secretary said, its competitive edge had eroded in every domain of warfare, air, land, sea, space and cyberspace, and is continually eroding. Appealing to Congress, he said, no strategy can survive without predictable funding. As hard as the last 16 years, that is, since the 9/11 attacks, have been. No enemy has harmed the U.S. military more than defense spending caps and sequestration. Referring to the current wrangle in the Senate over a bill to fund federal agencies temporarily, he said the shutdown would have an impact on military operations. Our maintenance activities will probably pretty much shut down. Over 50% altogether of my civilian workforce will be furloughed, he said. We do a lot of intelligence operations around the world and they cost money. Those obviously would stop.